Good day, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend this presentation. So, today we will delve into the topic of projective tests. Our discussion for tonight will center on the work of Schweighofer and Coles, who in 1994 provided a critical examination of the traditional definitions and the ethical concerns associated with these tests, no, the projective tests. Projective tests occupy a, I'd say, unique space, no, in psychological assessment. And unlike structured tests that present specific questions with predefined answer choices, projective tests use ambiguous stimuli. We went through it and we have administered some of it. We could tell ink blots, vague pictures, or incomplete sentences. So, this is to elicit a broad range of responses. Now, traditionally, projective tests are defined by the ambiguity of the stimuli they present. So, this definition is closely tied to the psychoanalytic theory that underpins these tests. In their 1994 paper, Schweighofer and Coles offered a critical examination of the traditional definition of projective tests. Both of them argued that defining these tests by their ambiguity of their stimuli is both scientifically and ethically problematic. Now, from a scientific standpoint, both of them pointed out that ambiguity is not a unique characteristic of projective tests. No, we've been reiterating this all throughout the semester. Oh, I like projective tests better. No, I like structured tests better. No, I like projective tests better because it's unique. No, it's not structured, and the mind is not structured. All of those debates, and both of these authors, they say that many psychological assessments contain some level of ambiguity. Therefore, um, it's counterintuitive. If you use ambiguity as the defining feature, it fails to distinguish projective tests from other types of assessments. So, ethically, Schweighofer and Coles raise concerns about how this ambiguity can be used to manipulate test takers, often without their full understanding or consent. Now they argue that this lack of transparency could lead to ethical violations, particularly in terms of informed consent. Now, both of them proposed a shift away from defining projective tests based on ambiguity, as we all say. Now, they suggested instead that these tests should be defined by their scoring process, which allows for a wide range of responses that are not predetermined by the test. Now, Schweighofer and Coles proposed an alternative definition for projective tests, one that shifts the focus from the ambiguity of the stimuli to the scoring process. They both argued that what truly sets projective tests apart is the broad range of responses that they elicit and the open ended nature of their scoring. Unlike psychometric tests, which typically measure specific attribute with high precision. No, in our practice, we know high precision as fidelity. No, unlike the psychometric tests, projective tests are designed to capture a wide array of information, or what we call the bandwidth, but with less emphasis on precise accuracy. Sorry, on precise accuracy. Now, this approach aligns with the bandwidth fidelity trade off in psychological testing. Now, bandwidth refers to the breadth of information that can be captured by a test, while fidelity refers to the accuracy of that information. Now, projective tests by design, they opt for a greater bandwidth. Now, this allows them to capture a wide range of psychological phenomena, even if the accuracy or the fidelity of the measurements is not as high as in more structured tests. Now, one of the major ethical concerns highlighted by Schweighöfer and Coles is the use of ambiguous stimuli to lower the test taker's defenses. While this may help in revealing unconscious thoughts, it can also be seen as manipulative, as it often prevents the test taker from fully understanding what the test is measuring. Now, this lack of transparency can undermine the ethical principle of informed consent. Now, we can really remember that informed consent is a cornerstone of ethical practice in psychology, and even according to the APA, the American Psychological Association, and other professional bodies, participants in psychological assessments must be fully informed about the nature, the purpose, and the potential outcomes of the test. So, basically, it includes an understanding of how their responses will be interpreted. However, the traditional approach to projective tests, which relies on ambiguous stimuli and often disguised purposes, can make it difficult for participants to provide truly informed consent. Now, this ethical issue is one of the key criticisms of traditional projective testing methods. Now, from the very beginning, the traditional approach to projective tests, we have defined that it's one of the widely utilized tests in psychological assessments. But as we say, it has faced significant scrutiny in recent years, both scientifically and ethically. Now, one of the primary scientific concerns with projective tests is the issue of reliability in psychological testing. Now, I know you know what reliability is. It's the consistency of results over time or across different evaluators. Now, unfortunately, projective tests often lack this consistency because the stimuli used, such as ink blots or abstract pictures, are intentionally ambiguous. The interpretation of a client's responses can vary widely from one clinician to another. So, I'll give you an example. For example, two different psychologists might interpret the same response in dramatically different ways. One might view a particular description of an ink blot as an indication of anxiety, while another might see it as a sign of creative thinking. Now, this variability undermines the inter-rater reliability of the tests, making it difficult to trust that the same individual would receive consistent interpretations across different assessors. Moreover, projectives, the projective tests have been criticized for their questionable validity, the extent to which they accurately measure what they claim to assess. For instance, while the ink blood test may aim to reveal underlying psychological issues, there is limited empirical evidence supporting the idea that responses to ink blots are predictive of specific personality traits or psychological disorders. For example, let's consider a client who describes an ink blot as a butterfly. Now, some clinicians, ako, if I become a clinician myself, I might interpret that butterfly as a symbol of transformation. Now, the other psychologists, others might see it as an avoidance of deeper issues. Now, without a clear and standardized framework for interpretation, it is difficult to assess whether the test is genuinely measuring psychological constructs or simply reflecting random associations. Now, from an ethical perspective, Projective tests raise several concerns, particularly in terms of informed consent and transparency, as what we have touched lightly earlier. Now, one ethical issue lies in the nature of the ambiguous stimuli because participants are usually unaware, right? And the lack of transparency because it could be problematic because participants may feel misled or manipulated when they later discover the full scope of the assessment. Now, additionally, participants may not fully grasp the purpose of the test, and this can lead to discomfort or distress. I have personally experienced this when I administered one of the figure drawing tests that was assigned to us, and um, I really observed my client feeling distressed and discomfort. And I know that it's part of our note taking and the test behavior. But in this sense, I'm gonna give you a scenario. Imagine you have a client, and this client you ask him or her to respond to the ink blots, and later find later you find out that their responses were being analyzed for signs of deep seated psychological issues. Now, if the client realizes that, it could result in feelings of anxiety or mistrust, especially if the client did not understand the test's intent beforehand. Now, ethical guidelines in psychological assessment emphasize the importance of protecting participants' autonomy, which includes providing them with enough information to make an informed decision about whether to participate. Now, with projective tests, however, the very nature of the test often precludes full transparency, as we have touched lightly earlier, right? Because this can make it challenging to ensure that participants are fully informed about what the test involves. Further, there is also the issue of test interpretation and feedback. Now, projective tests are not always straightforward, as we all know, and their interpretations may not always be shared with clients in a way that is constructive or understandable. Um, an example I can think of is if a client is told that their interpretation of an image suggests repressed anger or unresolved trauma, they may feel confused. I mean, I myself, if I was told that my interpretation mean um, that I have repressed anger or unresolved trauma, I may feel defensive or harmed by the feedback, especially if I do not view myself as having these issues. So, the lack of clarity in the feedback process raises ethical questions about the responsibility of the clinician to ensure that their interpretation does not cause harm to the client. All right, now despite the criticisms, there are strong arguments in favor of the continued use of projective tests, particularly in clinical contexts, where understanding the deeper unconscious aspects of an individual's psyche is crucial. Proponents of projective tests argue that these tools can provide valuable insights that are really not accessible through more structured assessments. For example, yes, projective tests can reveal hidden aspects of personality, deep seated fears, unresolved conflicts, and other complex psychological dynamics. But the role of the clinician is critical in this process. The effectiveness of projective tests largely depends on our expertise as the clinician and even our experience as a clinician in administering and interpreting the test. Now, a skilled clinician, hopefully, we all become skilled clinicians. We can navigate the subjective nature of the scoring process and use our judgment to draw meaningful and ethical conclusions from the responses. Now, hopefully, if we have this expertise in the future, it can help mitigate some of the concerns about reliability that are often raised against projective tests. Moreover, there are specific clinical contexts where projected tests are particularly valuable. For example, when other forms of assessment have proven inconclusive, when a deeper exploration of unconscious processes is required, projective tests can offer unique insights. They are also useful in settings where a direct inquiry might provoke defensiveness or socially desirable responses, as the ambiguous nature of the stimuli can help bypass these defenses. Okay, now to address the various criticisms and ethical concerns associated with projective tests, Schweighofer and Coles suggest redefining these tests in a way that emphasizes their scoring process rather than their use of ambiguous stimuli. Now, by focusing on how the responses are scored, highlighting the range of possible responses and non prescriptive nature of the scoring, this new definition seeks to align projective tests more closely with contemporary ethical standards. Now, another important step is to integrate projective tests with other assessment tools. As I have said earlier, particularly those that are more structured and have established reliability and validity. By using projective tests alongside psychometric assessments, us clinicians can cross validate our findings. Thereby, we're enhancing the overall reliability and validity of the conclusions. Now, looking ahead, the field of psychological assessment is likely to continue evolving. As part of this evolution, projective tests will need to adapt to meet modern scientific and ethical standards. And this may involve revising existing tests, developing new scoring systems, or finding innovative ways to combine projective test methods with other assessment tools. But the goal is to retain the valuable insights that projected tests can provide while ensuring that they are used in a scientifically rigorous and ethically sound manner. Now, in conclusion, projective tests have a long and storied history in psychological assessment. They offer the insights into our unconscious mind, and they are powerful tools in the hands of skilled clinicians. Hopefully, those are our hands. We're skilled, we become skilled. However, these tests are not without their challenges, as we have discussed for the past 20 minutes. Um, the traditional focus on ambiguous stimuli has led to both scientific and ethical criticisms, particularly as we have discussed the reliability, the validity, and the ethical use of these tests. To address these challenges, it is essential to redefine and refine the use of projective tests in a way that aligns with modern ethical standards. So, yun, it includes informed consent, maintaining transparency about the test's purpose, integrating projective tests with other assessments, as we are currently doing and practicing already, um, so that we can enhance the reliability and validity. Ultimately, the responsible use of projective tests requires a careful balance between understanding the limitations and recognizing their potential benefits. So, by prioritizing ethical considerations and using these tools judiciously, we can continue to gain insights into the human psyche, at the same time upholding the highest standards of psychological practice. So I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you in class. Thank you very much, everybody. Good evening.